Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the Predictive AI World, the latest edition that will be focusing on something truly exciting and refreshing, if I may say so, in terms of honesty in sales. The Predictive AI World, just to give you a quick introduction, has over the years hosted multiple experts in the industry across the board in webinars, podcasts, and video series, all of which are available at the links that you can see on your screen. It's your one-stop shop for everything AI in sales and marketing, and we have had some true revelations that have come to pass in these discussions. Today, as the latest edition, we are joined by Dr. Cindy Gordon, CEO and founder of SalesChoice Inc. Myself, I'm the CMO of SalesChoice. My name is Malay Upadhyay. And we have an esteemed and cherished guest today, Todd Capone, who is the founder of Sales Melon, as well as the author of The Transparency Sale. So without further ado, we are going to start by letting Cindy and Todd introduce themselves. Cindy, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Malay, and Todd and guests, most welcome today. We're sitting in Toronto. It's a nice sunny day, all kind of recovering from the Raptors basketball game last night, just a little bit of Canadian humor. We basically specialize in predictive analytics and guide sales professionals using AI to really help them crush their quota and meet their targets. Really delighted, Todd, to have you with us, and we'll let you say a few words and then we'll get underway.
Okay, perfect. Malay and Cindy, thank you for having me on. I won't make everybody read this, but what we're going to talk about today is basically happened as the result of a research study. Like I'm sure I may be the only person on earth who had a research study who changed their life. But I had spent 4 years as the chief revenue officer of Chicago's Power Reviews. And before that, I'd spent 4 years on the sales leadership team of ExactTarget through their IPO and their eventual acquisition by Salesforce for a little under $3 billion. So long pedigree of sales leadership. And like I said, and Cindy mentioned, this research study changed the way that I looked at sales to the point where I had to go write about it and I had to go get these ideas out there, and can't wait to talk to you more about what that means.
Thanks, Todd. We're really excited as well. So how we're going to start our discussion, everyone, is I'm going to give just a little thought perspectives on the importance and the rise of AI, and then we're really going to dive down into the elements of sales and transparency and sort of create the linkages of where AI can help yield transparency insights, or, quite frankly, counter transparency. I think it's a very provocative conversation. We're going to then open it up to dialogue with all of you, so please enter your questions and we'll take a look at those, and we'll have a discussion there, and then we will basically do our wrap. So in terms of the rise of AI, you can't open anything today, whether it's any publication, any newspaper, any blog channel, and even quite frankly, just being on our homes. This market, about 3 years ago, from a GDP, was predicted to be growing at about a 30% compound annual growth. It's actually growing around 60% growth, because we kind of have that perfect tsunami going on right now between the growth in AI, the growth in robotics, the growth in Internet of Things and blockchain. And it's an unprecedented growth curve. If you think back only 15 years ago, when we were actually seeing the growth in the e-commerce market, we've got a force here that's just unprecedented in the history of our world and mankind. So it's going to seep into basically everything. So we look at AI as actually the new oxygen, not the new electricity. In terms of this particular slide, it just highlights the overall market and some of the growth patterns, as well as the specific space that we participate in, which is classified as the predictive and prescriptive analytics market. And that market, as you can see, has a very strong growth outlook. In 2016, it was close to $5 billion, and predicted in 2022 to be probably closer to 34 billion, pardon me, just based on the growth trajectories that are happening. In terms of a real short definition of AI, is, you know, we find that if we ask different people this question, we do get different answers. Fundamentally, AI is not new. It's been here in the market for some time. A lot of the algorithms that we're using, quite frankly, were validated in, you know, in 1980s, and some of the earlier ones were in 1954, some of the earlier roots. But what's happened with the explosive growth of processing power and CPU processing power and the access to data, although, you know, the more access, the better. We've kind of got a trajectory of different solution sets that are solving different use cases. So on the sensing side of AI, where you process volumes of images and data, obviously those are often being used for medical purposes, for, you know, screening immigrants as well. So there's a whole generation of sensing technologies. On the understanding side, you start to look at mass volumes, and you try and interpret what might be those future patterns based on the patterns you see, identifying anomaly detections, obviously in fraudulent areas, in the areas that we specialize in predicting future outcomes for sales and sales forecasting. And then as you continue the journey, you move into some interesting areas which are harder without those baselines, where you actually start to guide humans on their options, being from AI based on this pattern we think, etc. So you're starting to move into an actual discourse generated by AI, not necessarily having rule-based logic. So that area is more specialized. It takes a lot of thought in the design and a lot of validation. If we look at the overall analytics market, and obviously let's put a transparency bar under, you know, under this construct. You know, the BI market is a very mature one. If you saw just yesterday, Salesforce just acquired Tableau. I think that was 15.6 billion. So that was a major development in our market. But the descriptive analytics market on the BI is much of that sense making is as important. You know, it often is looking in the rear view mirror and creating fancy dashboards, you know, that basically give us a stock of where we are, but not necessarily going to give us the insight on that investment for the future. So you've got to really recognize the speed of the market and the momentum. So descriptive analytics is certainly a mature industry. It's one that, you know, management continue to refine, but many companies are just leaping ahead and moving into dynamic infrastructures where AI is underpinning the logic. And if the future is, you know, is anything that's to come, it's really going to be on the cognitive side. And that's when we start having these computing platforms with genetic algorithms that are actually continuing to form and reform. What we need to do is really ensure that we have the transparency under those kinds of practices, so we don't into black box AI modality where we can't understand which algo is accountable for what. That won't hold up too well in terms of legal matters. Humans still have to be accountable and have the judgment to basically take on the risk. So, you know, we have some really interesting dichotomies as we're building out the intelligent enterprise. So that's a little bit of backdrop. We're going to move to the foundation of transparency. We'll weave back in some of the, I'd call it the dynamics in the AI industry that are creating some complexities right now around responsible AI. But, you know, you mentioned in your opening comments, Todd, you were riveted by this research, and that curiosity sparked, you know, obviously a book, but also a rethink of what's important as sales professionals. So our first question is, how do you think, Todd, buyer behavior and the importance of sales professionals is in influencing buyer decisions, and how is that all changing?
Yeah, well, first of all, the AI stuff is so interesting to me. What I've always been, I don't know if this actually exists, but a sales philosopher or kind of a sales historian. And if you look over time, it's always been about a 5 to 10 year lag after the pervasiveness of new technology where sales behavior and buyer behavior really change. So if we go way back to the beginning of the information age, which is really around the 1970s, it was the early 1980s when salespeople woke up and they were like, oh my gosh, the way that I used to add value no longer works. I need to change. And that's why in the early 80s, you had all these books like Solution Selling and Strategic Selling and Conceptual Selling. And that became the norm for a while. And then the digital age happened, really in the mid 90s, late 90s to early 2000s. And again, in the mid 2000s, salespeople woke up and they were like, hey, listen, if I don't change the way that I sell, I'm the equivalent of a drive-through attendant at like a McDonald's. People drive up, they tell me what they want, I tell them how much it costs, I try to upsell them a Happy Meal or some fries, and then hope for the best. And that had to change, and that's where we saw a lot of this insight selling and challenger sale and that sort of thing. And so if you go to the next slide, there's a new pervasiveness of technology that's changing the way that buyers research, and it has to change the way that we think about selling. So this is primarily thinking about it on the B2C side, but there is this massive proliferation that's happened in the world around this proliferation of reviews and feedback on everything we do, everything we buy, everything we experience. I bet for anybody listening that you wouldn't buy anything online or even choose a hotel or some kind of an experience that is of medium consideration, meaning it costs a few bucks, that you haven't done before, that you wouldn't go research reviews and ratings before doing it. And that's starting to influence so many decisions. And what's amazing is that is now becoming the norm, obviously across all of B2C, but it's working its way really aggressively into B2B. We see that with companies like G2 Crowd and Trust Radius in the tech space. We see it in companies like Glassdoor, where employees, both current and previous, are able to leave reviews around what the culture is like. Because as a buyer, we're trying to predict what that experience is going to be like, not only using your technologies, but working with you and your people. But Cindy, you mentioned about the research study that changed everything for me. I was the chief revenue officer of Chicago's Power Reviews. And what we were doing is helping retailers and brands collect and display ratings and reviews on their websites. So, if you're buying anything, let's say it's Crocs or Vineyard Vines or Jet, and you look at the product pages and you look at the reviews next to it, that was Power Reviews that was powering that. So we went out, we did this study of consumer behavior with Northwestern University in Chicago. And we found a couple of things. Number one was that 95% of us are using ratings and reviews to make any purchases of medium to high consideration that we hadn't made before. So 95%, and that study was 2016. I believe that it's probably gone up to 98%. Like I haven't met anybody who doesn't. Here's the rub, and here's what changed everything for me. If you go to the next slide, it'll give you the preview. But first of all, 82% of us seek the negative reviews first. So when you're looking at a list of reviews, 82% of us are going out and figuring out, all right, what are the people that don't like the product saying? That's what I want to look at first. And this one really was the kicker for me, was that when a buyer is buying something and a website is acting as the seller, a review score of a 4.2 to a 4.5 sells better than a perfect 5. And so as the chief revenue officer of a big sales org, I had about, I guess big is relative, but I had about 60 people. I looked across my sales floor and thought, oh my gosh, we have been teaching our sellers to sell as though we're a 5. And we are literally pushing buyers away. When we paint this picture of perfection, the buying brain goes, hey, wait a second, this can't be perfect. I'm gonna go do research on my own. And it's part of why reviews work on a website, but it's part of what inspired this whole research project about, in the B2B world, what if we led with our negatives? What if we adhered to the buying brain's desire to go out and figure out what the downside was, and we actually led with it? And when we did in the B2B space, sales cycles shrank dramatically. It was like magic. Win rates went up. We qualified deals in faster. We qualified deals out faster that we were probably going to lose anyway. So the old axiom is, hey, if you're going to lose fast. And we made it really hard on our competitors. Our competitors would talk about how they were better than us. And as it turns out, we had already told the client how the competitor was better than us. It was magic making and hugely built trust with our customers to speed up those sales cycles. So that's it. Imperfection and transparency sells better than perfection.
That's quite fascinating, Todd. I'm just chiming in. This is Malay here again, and it's quite profound what you are talking about. And yes, you're right. If we self-reflect when we are looking for the best restaurant or some place to go, it's the negative reviews that helps much more. But I'm just trying to get deeper into the psyche of it all. What is it about them? It's not just me finding a better restaurant or knowing well what the restaurant's weaknesses are. There's something else that must be going on that's making me more convinced that I should give it a try despite its weaknesses. Can you clarify on that a bit?
Absolutely. And so it's led me to my addiction, and I'm addicted to the brain science around this, which is, I guess, a weird thing to be addicted to. But I'm on the road right now. I'm actually in sunny Indianapolis today. I've got 2 books in my backpack. I'll be reading at the hotel tonight, like I can't stop. But it really all comes down to the fact that neuroscientists over the last 10 years they've pinpointed how we as human beings make decisions. And as anybody in business, whether you're an entrepreneur, you're in sales, you're in recruiting, like, wouldn't understanding how our brains make decisions be really useful? And again, for good, not evil. So if you go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about it. But one of the ones that was so interesting is this neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio. He's got a book from the 1990s that really started exploring this idea, and it's called Descartes to Error, that started exploring this idea that we as human beings, we think we make logical decisions, but as it turns out, we make all of our decisions with feeling. The feeling center in our brain, which is the limbic, is the one that's kicking off all of the decisions. And then we're using our neocortex, which is the outside, the logic center, to back those up. So first of all, like, what do I mean by logic versus feeling? Well, logic is, this was one of the things that I know we were doing wrong, is the leading with logic, which means, we had an ROI calculator. We were using our ROI calculator to prospect. So we were leading with logic, but that's not how people make decisions. We were throwing data at clients. We were throwing features and benefits at clients. Now, the client is making a feeling decision and then using that logic to back it up, whether they're for it or against it. And so what do I mean by feeling? Well, there's another neuroscientist, Dr. David Rock. And like, this is kind of deep, but I think it's so cool. And I actually wrote this up on my whiteboard at work. I've got it at home. And it's called the SCARF model of feelings. And what does that mean? Well, SCARF. So let's just go through the acronym. When we make decisions, we're making our decisions based on the acronym SCARF. The S means status. So will this purchase make me look good? Will it elevate my status among my peers? Will it help with my validation? Will I be recognized? What kind of feedback will I get as a result of this? The C is the one that really drives this, is certainty. So we as human beings, we're wired to try to predict what our experience is going to be. And when a seller comes at us with nothing but perfect, we're wired to go predict, all right, why we're not. And that's why these reviews work, and that's why the imperfect reviews work. That the A in SCARF is autonomy. So when we're making a decision, we're trying to maintain control, maintain autonomy, be given the tools and resources to do things simply and easily and not lose control. The R is relatedness. Relatedness, part of that is the social construct of, like, am I one of the crew here? Am I one of the team? But like, really the new relatedness is, when I buy this, am I doing something for the greater good? Like, am I going to feel good about this because I'm doing something good for society? And then the F is fairness. And that just comes down to, is the purchase I'm making, not only in terms of dollars, but the resources it takes for me to put this in, is it worth is the juice worth the squeeze? Is it worth the dollars and resources in what I'm going to get in return? So to kind of wind that back a little bit, imperfection works because it gives our brains a better feeling of what our experience is going to be like, which really checks the box on certainty quite a bit. It helps us predict what our autonomy is going to be. It really helps us predict the fairness piece. And in some cases, it helps with the other two, in terms of status, like, hey, was this really easy and made a big impact? So I'm going to look really cool to my peers. And relatedness, like, is this going to make a big impact, not only on me and, but my employees and the greater good, which is our customers. So that SCARF model, I think, really defines a lot. It talks a lot about how we make decisions as human beings, not only in the products we buy, but why we take jobs, why we leave jobs, why we stay engaged as employees. There's so much to it. Like, if we had 3 hours, we could really dig in, but that's kind of the driver behind why this imperfection wins.